Every author who hires a ghostwriter makes one demand: you must capture my voice. But how easy or hard is that? Do they even know what their voice is or sounds like? I'll tell you a funny story about that later in the podcast. But for now, let's get started. Hi, I'm Janal. I'm a ghostwriter, book coach, and developmental editor. And I'm delighted to welcome Anne Janzer to our podcast today. Anne has written numerous books about the science of writing. I call it the science of writing. She might not call it the science of writing, but she's one of the deeper thinkers I know about the whole writing process. And we're going to talk about voice and how to capture it. And we're going to hint at a survey that she has been doing to talk to ghostwriters and authors about the use of voice. And we'll put a link to the actual survey results in the show notes. And those should be available sometime in April 2023. So be sure to check on that for the latest survey results. Right now, they're not available. So stay tuned. Hey, Anne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here to talk about voice. I'm excited about it.
So are we. Well, let's start with the basic foundation. What is voice?
Voice is very simply, there's no simple answer. Voice is how the reader perceives the person behind the words, right? So it seems so simple, and yet, when I did research on this, I ended up really quickly down this huge rabbit hole. There's poetic voice, there's literary voice, and there's a really interesting, since you said I talk about the science of writing, I'm going to share with you something, some research I found that said 70% of us, as we read, we hear an inner reading voice in our head. We hear the words. So your reader actually often gives your words a real voice, in a sense. It's just inside their head rather than outside. So the metaphor of the spoken voice is very interesting, carries over in many ways to the writing voice. But the interesting thing about this is that voice is something we intend, but our readers interpret. It's a partnership between you and your reader. So it's tricky, and it's a fascinating subject. A lot of fun.
That is, it opens up so many more questions than I would have asked.
Sorry about that.
Let's go off script for a second. So when the reader is reading your work, they're reading it in their voice. So that adds another variable to the whole equation that I hadn't even thought about. Is that correct?
Yeah. So sometimes it's their own voice, and apparently sometimes it's another voice that they provide, that they just make up for you, right? They are assigning. Anytime we read, we assign a voice. Because if you think about the development of brain and the language, we have been speaking human beings for a long time. So the spoken voice is what our brains are designed to deal with. And yet we've only been writing for, a really, really short time evolutionarily. So we're just using those systems as we read. Many of us, not everybody, many of us translate that into a spoken voice in our heads. So yes, it's an amalgam of the reader and the reader's maybe past experiences and your voice and all of these things coming together in the reader's head, which is a fascinating way to look at it.
It is fascinating. I'm going to have to check myself now, because when I read Shakespeare, I definitely read it in a different voice. In fact, I read the cheat sheet version, which has it translated into modern English. So it's a bit easier. But when I see the original words, you really have to think twice about reading Shakespeare in the original version.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm reading a book now written by a woman about a woman, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I making her sound? So I'm going to think about that the next time I go back to that book. But let's go back on script. Okay. Okay. So why is capturing voice important for a ghostwriter and for the author?
Right. So if you're ghostwriting, this is a really valuable skill to have in your repertoire of writing skills, is the ability to capture different voices. So I spent more years than I really want to count up as a freelance marketing writer, and I would go into different brands and I would write in the voice of the brand. And, whether it was a trusted established one, they'd write a certain way. If it was a little startup that had no style guide, but they, were zipping around their office on scooters, which I did see, you had to write in a different voice. You had to just adjust it. And to some extent, the more fluid you are with your writing, the more it can tap into your innate communication skills, the easier this becomes, because we have some ability to mimic or mirror each other. I'm sure if you read cognitive science things, you've heard about the mirroring neurons, that we have this instinctive wanting to connect with people by mirroring. If you've ever talked to someone who has a specific accent and you find yourself sliding into their accent, like embarrassingly, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. That's your brain just doing that instinctively mirroring thing. So as writers, if you want to be a ghostwriter, it's really good to learn how to tap into that in your writing and pick up on some of that. And when you do this, if you're ghostwriting for someone, if you're ghostwriting a book, or, writing smaller projects like articles and blog posts, people do want, it's so much more valuable to them if they feel like it represents what they would have done had they had the time and maybe the fluidity. Yeah, you had Lisa Tenner on this podcast just a few, I don't know, not that long ago. And she spoke about, to be a highly paid ghostwriter, you need to be good at adopting your client's voice. So this is a set of skills that if we all kind of work on, and we are upping our marketability in a sense, but we're also just making people happier. And frankly, to be completely honest, I think it's really fun. I think it's really a really fun challenge. Ooh, how am I going to write this so that this client sees themselves in it? But of course, I'm not really writing like that client, because I've read what they write and that's not what I'm doing. But they're going to feel like it's what they would have written. It's the best version of what they want to put out. It's a fun challenge to do. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. So how can we capture our clients' voices?
So the first thing I want you to remember is that no matter what you're writing, whether you're writing in your own voice or your client's voice, you are always writing a fictional character. Right? If you're writing about yourself, you are just presenting some part of yourself. Even if it's a deeply moving memoir, it's not your whole self on the page. It's a part of you, right? You can't fit the whole self. You're always choosing. So you're creating this fictional character that is your client, some part of your client that you're writing for. And you want to capture those attributes that bring that character to life, the way a novelist doesn't describe everything about the person, right? They say, okay, that I'm going to give you 3 facts. He's got, Columbo has a tatty raincoat and whatever it may be, that the telling details. And that's what you really want to get to capture imprint. So you're not going to copy everything about how they write and how they speak. But if they have a specific mannerism or way of approaching a topic, to slide that in there every now and then is going to be beautiful, right? So when I look at controlling voice, there are 2 sets of levers to use. All right. So one is what is on the page, what you can look at, things like sentence length and structure, the actual words people use, the punctuation. If they write, punctuation is almost a personal kind of fingerprint of our writing that we tend to ignore a lot, and it's really interesting to look at that. So this is what lives on black and white.
And I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? There was like a dropout on the computer sound.
Sure. So punctuation is almost like a fingerprint of our writing. It is a set of whirls and things that kind of shows the way that we think and express ourselves. And often we ignore that. But if you're looking for ghostwriting for someone and you see that they write with a lot of dashes, which implies a certain kind of thought, include some of that in your writing. If you see that they're very much a semicolon structured thinking person, include a little bit of that in your writing. Take a look at the punctuation, which is an interesting thing that we as writers, I don't know, I tend to look right past. until I'm at the editing phase. But it does contribute to voice in an interesting way. It contributes to the rhythm of what that inner reading voice is speaking. It contributes to the sound of the words. So look at what's on the page. Look at, how long are the sentences that my client speaks in? If there's a certain set of words that they often use to describe a product or a solution or an approach, definitely, use those keywords, use those essential words so that they see their vocabulary there, assuming the words work. So, always make the client look smart. That's the first thing. So look at what's on the page and experiment with that. This is stuff that mostly we can do in revision if we need to. The more interesting and harder stuff is the levers that happen in our heads right before you write. And this we can get at with some careful project planning with the client. What I would encourage you to do is to always do the groundwork of getting at who is that personality that the client actually wants to project. I'm going to share with you a marketing exercise that I did. It's a marketing trick, the 3 adjective trick, right? You ask someone to say, well, give me 3 adjectives for how you want to show up in this book if you're writing a book or the article, or what you want your brand to be like. 3, no more than 3. To get them to really get at the most essential tone, the most essential things that they want to convey personality-wise. And it's interesting challenge. It can stump people for a while. People will want to give you more than 3, but it's really hard to embody more than 3 adjectives in any piece of writing. Honestly, in a shorter piece, you're lucky if 2 come through, right? So that's the key of it. If you can ask people to really define this first, if you can really work with them on that first, it's going to save you so much trouble down the road, because you're saying, okay, this is the aspects of this person's personality that they really want to come through. Now, if they give you adjectives that are clearly in conflict with their personality, I want it to be cheerful and they're just mopey or something. I don't know what you do then. Then I think what you're going to recognize is that you're creating, again, that fictional character, and it's going to be a little bit more composite of what you're bringing and what they're bringing. The only thing that really matters, I think, is that the client feels that it represents this vision of who they think they are, whether or not that is, in fact, how they present themselves to you. That's going to be a more challenging situation. But then I think you just want to think of it as more of a collaborative. I'm going to be the cheerful part, and they will be the expert part, or whatever it may be. More of a composite, because of course, when you're ghostwriting, it's always a composite. You're writing, you're creating the words. Your voice is always there. You may be like the actor speaking the lines of a script. The playwright wrote the lines, but the actor embodies it. When you're ghostwriting, you are like the actor. Of course, you're bringing your whole self as you write and putting your words there. But you're trying to put together this character that represents the client that you're ghostwriting for.
Fantastic. Let me tell you about a situation I had with one of my clients where he felt I was not capturing his voice. And to show you how crazy it was, I'll give you 2 examples. He had written a manual, and I copied part of the manual and put that into the book because it was easy. It was his voice. He had written it. It was highly technical, and it was a good way of explaining it. He read it and said, that doesn't sound like me. And I was like, you wrote this. So what do you do, or what should we do when we have a client who looks at what we've written and said, that's not my voice, but it is?
So this is so important. The one don't in ghostwriting is don't try to write just exactly like they write, because they don't they may not be good at expressing who they really feel they are in their voice. It's almost like, okay, here's another fun science fact for you. All right. I can't help myself. When you speak, a part of your brain mutes the external, mutes the reception of the external airwaves coming in. So you don't hear your voice on the outside. You hear it mostly as it resonates inside your head. So if you've ever listened to a recording of your voice and you're like, holy, that's what I sound like, because that doesn't sound at all like what's going on in my head. I think that something analogous happens with writing, especially for people who are not inherently writers and hence are more likely to be engaging a ghostwriter. They don't see their writing objectively. They have a mismatch between what the fluidity and the beautiful expression in their heads and what comes out in paper when they write. And so what you are trying to do is get at what they envision in their head. And so, yeah, their voice may come through most clearly when it's not, in fact, their words, which is crazy, but it kind of makes sense psychologically. I can see, Dan, your perspective, you're like, what the hey, you wrote this. It has to be your voice. But it wasn't the voice that they thought that they were projecting, which is really, really interesting.
Right. Let's talk about transcripts. I mean, I love recording all my sessions with my clients. So I have a transcript because when we brainstorm or just interact, they'll say something brilliant and I'll say, that's brilliant. You should put that in the book. And they'll say, what did I say? And it's impossible to recreate. That's why it's great to have a transcript. But what I found a lot of these programs that are transcripts now, and this is 2023, they're not quite ready for prime time. Some of them don't know what a period is and just have these long run-on sentences. Other programs I found will repeat words, even though you didn't repeat words, or even worse, or maybe not worse, but sometimes we stumble over words ourselves and don't even realize it until we see a transcript. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about using a transcript for recording your sessions with your authors? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or what should we look out for?
Oh, I think it is a good thing. First of all, it makes you more truly present, so you don't have to be taking notes. So right there, that's a win. And people do come out with these gems. And when you can put one of those pithy gems in there, even if you edit it just a smidge to make it grammatically correct or whatever, it's great. And this is another one of my tips with ghostwriting is sort of the sprinkle method, right? People don't have to see themselves in the whole dang thing. If you write a fairly clean, what do I want to say? If you write almost as if you were absent as the narrator, right? So we have one of the decisions we make in writing is how present or absent we are as the writer, right? Are we just describing the sky and not putting our personal slant on it, whatever. So if you write, for a lot of cases, if you write fairly absent and then you sprinkle in the like a story from the perspective of the author and a few little pithy words that they say, if they're reading along and they just see little glimpses of themselves and their style, they're going to feel like they are seen and represented in the work and feel like it's their voice, which is really interesting. It's I call it the sprinkle method. You know, just think about donuts with sprinkles. Just sprinkle in the author on it as you write. And generally, when I have done that, especially if I'm writing about a fairly abstract kind of topic, this wouldn't work with a memoir writer or something, but with a fairly abstract topic that someone's writing about, they really feel like, wow, you really captured my voice. And really, it's just a small percentage of working in, then I add in this personal perspective and I just add in this and add in that a small bit, and they feel like they've been seen, they're there. So think about okay, a couple things. So 3 questions and the sprinkle method. Those are 2 things that you can put to work right away as you ghostwrite for people.
Great. Let me throw another curveball at you. What happens when you're dealing with an author who isn't very verbal? or speaks in cliches or is overly flowery. So both ends of the spectrum. How do you make them real characters?
Yeah. This is tough. I've had this sometimes speaking with authors who, working with authors for whom English is not their native language too, so that the interchanges we have don't give me the language clues that I might otherwise have. So what do you do? Again, to make them feel seen, I would look for, you are going to be creating, if they're not very verbal, you're going to be creating the voice for them that feels comfortable. And I would stay to a relatively, simple sentence constructs. I mean, you don't want someone to read something, then meet the person and say, where did that come from? Right. Because this isn't the person I read. Right. So stay with simple language constructs. If they're overly verbal and ornate, again, I would pare that down to what the reader needs, because again, we must always, even as we're serving the client, we must, of course, be serving the reader. We have to serve the reader, or the client is going to fail in the thing that you're writing. So I would pare it way down and then let them sprinkle in a few little ornamentations of phrase. If they are just addicted to the cliches, you can let one or two in maybe so that they feel like they are seen. But you are in many ways mediating between what they want and what goes into the reader's head. You've got to package that for them. So really, you are serving two audiences. You serve the client by serving the reader. And that's the argument you need to make back to the client. I've worked with a client. I was working, he was from Spain. And in Spain, you demonstrated your education and expertise by very long, complicated sentences. And if I was working on I wasn't ghostwriting for him. I was just doing a website copy for him. And he said, "Oh, no, this is much too simple. We need much more long sentences." I'm like, okay, but you are writing for the American reader who is not going to read that online. So you get to choose. Do you want it to sound like, what will make your parents happy? Or do you want to sound like what will sell your software? So sometimes you have to have those conversations as well with people, especially if there's cultural differences, as there was in that point. It was very interesting. I got just so much. This is much too easy to read. That's
I
fascinating.
love it when Grammarly looks at some of my material and says, this sentence is too complicated. How about breaking it in two, or replace with this version? It's like, they're right.
9 times out of 10, that's the right thing to do. Exactly.
And can you give us a couple of do's and don'ts for us as ghostwriters on how to capture the voice or how to deal with clients?
Sure. So the do is remember that you are always creating a fictional character and not capturing that client. You're always creating that character that exhibits the attributes that the client wants to exhibit in that situation. And that really simplifies your task as a ghostwriter, frankly, rather than trying to write as this person. Don't try to copy exactly what they do. Stan's story so beautifully illustrated, because they'll be like, I don't like that, even if it's their own words. And do ask up front, do the work to begin with on what are your intentions for the reader? What do you want them to be done? How do you want to show up? What are your 3 adjectives? What's the most important things for you about how you show up in this work? Because as you have discussions later on, you can go back to, well, let's see if this serves those 3 adjectives. Let's see if this serves these key objectives for this piece. And that can be very, very helpful. So, and most of all, just have fun. Treat it as a really interesting puzzle. And I think it takes some of the weight off of that and lets you tap more easily into some of those innate mirroring and tone shifting skills that we do have, but we often don't put to work.
Very interesting. I'm writing a business stable story now. We actually are inventing fictional characters, and it's a lot of fun. You have a lot of freedom and flexibility.
Right.
And thank you so much for joining us today. How can people get in touch with you, and who is your ideal client?
So you can find me at my website, which is annejanzer.com, and there's a silent E on the Anne. And you can also find, hopefully, the survey results there. My ideal client I do some nonfiction book coaching. So my ideal client is someone who's working on a nonfiction book. Usually, you might have guessed, I'm good with people who are writing about sciencey or geeky things. you may have noticed that about me, because I'm really fascinated with translating those things to the larger audience and giving people the joy of understanding and getting curious about those things. So I enjoy working with authors on those kinds of topics as well.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks everyone for listening. We have more than 175 other interviews on this YouTube channel to help you write your book in a flash. Check them out.